A long time ago, the Earth was a very different place. Hundreds of millions of years before the dinosaurs, the Earth was covered with vast oceans, filled with life. That life took the form of simple single-celled organisms, phytoplankton and algae. Those single-celled organisms converted the sun's energy into chemical energy. They consumed carbon dioxide and produced oxygen. When they died, they fell to the bottom of the ocean floor and were covered by layers of sediment. Heat and pressure converted those ancient single-celled creatures into oil. About 150 years ago, humans drilled into the earth and began extracting that oil. And that's when our world profoundly changed. Oil is the lifeblood of our society. Almost everything in our lives is made from oil. It heats us, it cools us, it feeds us, it brings us what we need to live. It takes us where we need to go. But there are problems with our use of oil. Serious problems. My name is Josh Tickell. I've spent my life searching for a solution to those problems. This is my story.
America is addicted to oil, imported from unstable parts of the world.
80% of the world's oil reserves are in the hands of OPEC countries. These are the countries that will dictate our economic stability.
It's the military petroleum complex. They are crack fiends for carbon.
We are facing the decline of the primary energy supply that runs the economy.
I shall be dead by then, so it's not my problem, it's your problem.
Can I get a medium Sprite and all your used cooking oil, please?
What do you mean?
You know the used frying oil that you fry things in?
We use what?
All right, what can I get you?
You know, you guys use used frying oil, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered if I could get all of that.
All of it?
Yeah.
Well, I really don't know about that.
I was born in 1975 in Melbourne, Australia. My mom was from Louisiana. She's a French Cajun. My father was a surfer kid from Australia. My brother and I were free to ride our bikes everywhere. You know, Australia has incredible wildlife. You've got kangaroos and goannas. They stand on their hind legs and their frill comes out. I loved playing with them and having them chase me and chasing them. And we just had a plethora of wonderful natural things to play with. My parents would just let us do whatever we wanted. I mean, they just never worried about us. There wasn't anything to worry about. Over time, my mother missed the US more and more. And she would get letters. She was just crying. One after another, her family members were dying in the US. And eventually they decided that my mother would go back to the US with my brother and I. There was a lot of refineries everywhere. We couldn't swim in the water like we could in Australia. You know, we couldn't go fishing like we could in Australia. There were signs about toxic spills. There were signs about don't swim here, don't fish here. That was really a disconnect. I went off into my own world and started experimenting with nature. My high school science project, I decided to test the local waterways. And the test results came back with lead, mercury, things that were not supposed to be in the waterways. The project went to state, and one of the judges said, you know, I'm tempted to disqualify you. I said, why? And he said, well, I work for the Environmental Protection Agency, and we've done all of these tests. And your results are completely off. And it would only be later that I would learn that the Environmental Protection Agency of Louisiana gets 90% of its funding from permits issued to oil companies. The agency that is supposed to be protecting the people is funded by the industry it's supposed to protect people from. It was during the time I was at New College. I went to Europe as part of my degree in sustainable living. I began to work on organic farms. These people really cared for their animals, their land, their soil. Everything was part of a system. I wanna tell you how it's gonna be. One day I saw this farmer pouring something that looked like vegetable oil into his tractor, and he said, it's biodiesel. Biodiesel? I mean, we had been working with a tractor and a car, fueled by crops that we had grown ourselves. I'd seen the crops as seeds. You know, there it is, biodiesel. If I could bring this fuel to America, if this would catch on, this could change the world. Going down the road, feeling bad. I couldn't wait to get back to the US. I became obsessed with engines. How can an engine run on vegetable? How is this possible? And then I learned about Dr. Rudolf Diesel, who it turns out actually invented the diesel engine to run on vegetable oil 100 years ago. That fired me up even more, and I took the rest of my student loan money and I bought a little used Winnebago with a diesel engine, and I started experimenting. I learned that you can make biodiesel from any vegetable oil. Sunflowers, soybeans, canola. Well, vegetable oil is quite expensive. I mean, a gallon is like $4 or $5. How can I make biodiesel from a cheap source of vegetable oil? You bring the French fries, but keep the ketchup on the side. My plan was to take this Winnebago and take it around the country on biodiesel that I made from used cooking oil from fast food restaurants and teach people about biodiesel. And so I sat down with a few of my friends and we sketched out this thing that would suck up oil from a restaurant, mix it with alcohol and lye, and spit out biodiesel. And I called it the Green Grease Machine.
Every week here on Today, Leonard's Look gives our Mike Leonard a chance to examine a little piece of Americana. This morning, it's about what you have left after a meal of fast food. In a word, it's about grease.
Grease?
Grease.
The other day I met a man.
You're that guy.
Taking a trip all across the land.
You're that veggie van guy.
He's got a car that runs on grease.
I saw you on the Today Show.
A side of fries and a burger, please.
People would see the veggie van. They'd roll down their windows.
It won't be long till you're a fan. All right. Taking a trip in the veggie van.
It got people to come out and ask questions. Hey, that's weird. You drive a van on vegetable oil? Hey, man, how many French fries to the acre does that thing get? I mean, people were interested.
And I got a diesel, biodiesel. I got a biodiesel van. Diesel, diesel, biodiesel. I got a biodiesel van.
You know, I'd done this 2-year trip to promote biodiesel. I'd done hundreds and hundreds of interviews, radio, TV, newspaper, magazine. Well, I wrote 2 books. I lectured all around the US. I lectured all around the world. But nothing significant happened with biodiesel. I mean, if anything, we slid backwards. It was almost like I hadn't done anything. And then everyone remembers where they were that day. We were all in a state of shock. According to the CIA, 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. the largest oil producer in the world. We may never know what happened that day, but we all remember what happened next. Is there a connection to oil? Did our choice of fuel lead to this? The only way to get that answer was to go back out on the road, and I had a pretty good idea of where to start looking.
Now we're ready to travel.
I think 9/11 reminded us all of what's important. The first place I wanted to go was back home.
When I was young, the bayou was just beautiful. We swam in the bayou, we ate all the food out of the bayou. Cajun people love to share their food, they love to fish, they love to dance.
A Cajun is somebody who eat anything that don't eat him first. We ate jambalaya, catfish, gumbo, anything that you could catch out of the rivers and swamps. That was the staple of our diet.
God didn't give Louisiana white beaches like he gave Florida. He didn't give us mountains like he gave Colorado. He gave us dead dinosaurs. He gave us a Jurassic Park of oil and gas from which we've built a huge refining and manufacturing industry.
Louisiana actually produces more gasoline than any other state in the nation. We have 150 petrochemical facilities in a 100-mile area. The refineries heat crude oil in distillation towers. Oil vapors condense along the sides, splitting into a variety of products, like diesel fuel and gasoline. The leftover toxic chemicals turn the surrounding air and soil into what the EPA calls the fallout area.
Well, when you drive along the highway, all you see is something that looks sort of like the Emerald City. You know, you see all these towers and columns and tanks, and the whole purpose is to manufacture chemicals that are building blocks that are used for other manufacturing processes, as well as finished products like gasoline, jet fuel.
Plastics, chlorine, ammonia, nitrates, fertilizers, PVC. But there's a third fraction of the oil barrel. That third fraction is waste, usually toxic waste. There's only 3 ways to get rid of it. You can burn it, you can dump it on land, or you can dump it in water. And so for the last 70 years, the oil companies in Louisiana have been doing all 3. Growing up in Louisiana, in history class, everyone watches a film called The Louisiana Story. It shows the story of a young Cajun boy and his Cajun family, and an oil derrick moves in. And the oil people are friendly, they give them money, they hit a gusher, they cap the well, and then they leave the place almost better than they found it.
One little detail that we were never told. The film was funded, paid for, by Standard Oil. It was like Standard Oil's first public cover-up.
They were going into Louisiana, ripping the bayous open, and creating a toxic cesspool.
I remember driving back from New Orleans. We would pass these long stretches, and I'd just see these horrible fires and these thick, ominous-looking clouds of smoke for miles. The stench was terrible.
One of the ways that the petrochemical companies get away with releasing more emissions of chemicals and byproducts and waste products into the environment than they're actually permitted to do is that they have these little accidents. And sometimes they're not so little. Sometimes the accidents are great big and there's huge explosions. They ask people around here to run inside their homes, close their doors and windows, and try to seal them up with tape.
Our community is surrounded by 11 petrochemical plants, a hazardous waste facility, and a Superfund site. As a consequence, our entire swamp, as well as the community, became polluted. And this pollution bioaccumulated in the organisms, so that when people ate fish, they were eating contaminated fish. This has been documented by EPA.
When you take a look at the local emergency planning committee's records of these accidents, there are between 200 and 300 a year.
We have studies after studies after studies that were just never published.
This is a cover-up in your opinion?
It's a cover-up in their opinion. Facts about working with PVC. PVC is a non-hazardous material made from vinyl chloride monomer. VCM exposure is virtually non-existent. I didn't plant this here. I mean, this is just happens to be what's here. PVC dust is non-toxic. These are all the things that they send to the folks who are working out in the field. There are documents in here that say if we don't tell what we know, it could be construed as evidence of an illegal conspiracy on the part of industry to withhold vital information from the government.
Don't you know children was born here and they left all this water contaminated? They didn't come and knock on anybody's door and say, y'all need to be moved out of here. They just let the people live like, you know, okay, they die, so what?
One thing that started to really become clear was that women were relating to me about this strange problem that didn't affect any generation but their daughter's generation. There was this increase in fertility problems, there was an increase in birth defects, and there was an increase in reproductive problems, miscarriages, a higher rate of miscarriages.
I mean, your husband used to work here, right?
My husband worked at Conoco, yeah. And, you know, we're not able to have kids.
1988, I'm sitting on the foot of my mother's bed. She's sick. On the news comes a breaking report of a Greenpeace protest, and the banners read, Cancer Alley. This section of land in Louisiana has the highest number of cancer incidents in the United States. He said, people are sick, people are dying in this state, and it's because of oil processing. I turned and I looked at my mother lying in bed.
I'd always dreamed of a large family. And I'm very privileged and honored to have two wonderful sons, but I had 9 miscarriages.
Factor that into the cost of gasoline. Make the companies pay for that. See how much a gallon of fuel costs. People ask me why I do what I do. Do I tell them the truth? Do I tell them that I grew up hating oil companies? Do I tell them that that hatred was what fueled me? Everywhere that oil is processed, this happens. There's a cancer alley in New Jersey. There's a cancer alley in California. There's a cancer alley in Nigeria. Those people suffer just as much. Detroit used to be the undisputed car capital of the world. But all is not well in Motor City. What happened to the vision of the once great American auto industry? Henry Ford, the visionary father of the modern auto industry, grew up on a farm outside of Detroit. Maybe that's why he designed his Model T to run on ethanol alcohol, a fuel made from corn. White lightning, moonshine. Ford's alcohol captured 25% of the fuel market in the Midwest. Now, when he did that, red flags went up at Standard Oil. John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, started funding an amendment that would become known as Prohibition. That one law shut down all alcohol production in the U.S., including ethanol alcohol. For 12 of the 13 years of Prohibition, Ford continued to produce ethanol-compatible cars. And then he gave up. 1 year later, Prohibition was lifted. President Teddy Roosevelt broke up Standard Oil due to its monopoly of the energy market and its interference in government. 88 years later, the two largest parts of the company, Exxon and Mobil,
reunited, forming a global corporation with profits totaling more than all the automakers combined.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the North American International Auto Show.
The standard line from Detroit is, "We can't convince consumers to buy green cars."
Oh, we're just meeting popular demand. Popular demand, they want Yukons and Hummers, and we just make Yukons and Hummers because of popular demand. Ignoring the hundreds of millions of dollars they put in advertising, persuading people they really need a Hummer or a Yukon.
Good for camping, good for off-roading. It's really the main focus of the Hummer for me.
Yeah, it seems like a good vehicle for off-roading. Do you go off-roading a lot?
Actually, no.
After 9/11, we passed a law that said that if you buy a car that weighs 6,000 pounds or more, that the government will essentially buy it for you in tax breaks. To stimulate the economy as part of the economic stimulus package that passed the United States Congress, deep tax breaks for cars that weighed 6,000 pounds or more. Those are just a list of cars. Those are just cars. These cars, economic stimulus.
In World War II, we went from producing Studebakers and Buicks to producing Sherman tanks and long-range bombers in a matter of a month. And you're telling me you can't produce a car that gets better than 26 miles per gallon? Look at Toyota. They've become the #1 car company in the world, largely due to the popularity of the Prius.
Toyota made the choice to build hybrids when the American companies made the choice at the same time. They had the options. They had hybrids on the books. They could have done it, but they took a short-term view, and Toyota took a long-term view.
I wanted a more fuel-efficient car, not so much because I'm some kind of do-gooder, only because I don't like going to the gas station all that much.
People are buying Priuses, and they're buying them because they're making a statement. The same thing with diesel cars. People are buying diesel cars and they're importing them into the United States. After all, you can pour biodiesel straight into a diesel car with no modifications. I searched the whole auto show for diesel vehicles. I only found one, the V10 Touareg that Volkswagen raced across Africa. It wasn't for sale.
Based on their experience, Americans know that diesels are noisy and smoky and slow. That's not what diesel technology is today. That's not what's coming out of Europe. What they call common rail turbocharged diesels are phenomenal.
Diesel engines have changed dramatically in the last 15 to 20 years. Beginning in 2007, the emission standards for diesel vehicles and gasoline vehicles will become the same.
And of course, you're going to get something on the order of 30% improvement in fuel economy. In some models, it's even more than that. If you're worried about CO2 and global warming.
Biodiesel causes reduction in emissions of certain toxic compounds.
In Germany, an independent car company called Laremo just produced a diesel car that gets over 150 miles per gallon.
That's why, especially in Europe, they've just gone hog wild over buying diesels.
Bill Ford, CEO, Chairman, Ford Motor Company.
In 2006, Ford lost $12.7 billion.
Thomas Lasorda, CEO and President, Daimler Chrysler Corporation.
Chrysler cut 13,000 jobs and lost $1.5 billion.
Rick Wagner Jr., Chairman, CEO, General Motors Corporation.
GM cut 35,000 jobs. They lost $10.6 billion.
Why the heck can't all of America's cars run on electricity and advanced biofuels? Why?
When Detroit, they were shown that they would save millions of lives as they put seatbelts in their cars, they resisted it. And they didn't do it because they thought it was the morally right thing to do, which it was. They didn't do it until they were forced to do it by legislation. And we're in the same place right now.
Consumers can choose to buy the Prius instead of the Hummer, and governments can choose to subsidize the Prius instead of the Hummer.
Because our government subsidizes wasteful cars, the average American car is 30% bigger than those overseas, which means our cars also consume about 30% more fuel. With the largest car fleet in the world, our population, only 4.5% of the Earth's inhabitants, makes almost half of the world's automotive CO2. I went to see Colin Campbell, renowned oil geologist and author of the book, The Coming Oil Crisis. Colin showed me the Oil and Gas Journal in which ExxonMobil first printed the graph that shows that our planet's oil supply is running out.
1981, the world started using more than it found, and the gap is widening.
Colin and ExxonMobil are not alone. Hundreds of books, thousands of websites, and countless charts show that our oil is running out. Even Matthew Simmons, who heads the world's largest oil bank and has testified in front of Congress, agrees.
Oil is actually non-renewable, even though there are some economists that now believe that maybe it really is renewable, and that is preposterous. We have a society in the United States, more than any other country on earth, that has an enormous appetite for oil for our daily well-being, and we are blindly assuming that the more we need, the more we will have because we need it so much. And that since we've never run out, we will never run out.
We consume 25% of the world's oil. We have 2% of the world's oil, all of our reserves. We cannot drill our way out of this.
This is Ken Hearn. He's a former CEO at Texaco. If anyone knows about oil, it's this guy.
As we stand today, it's getting harder to find it. It's getting very hard to find it in a Western hemisphere, if you will. And I'll give you my best example I can give you. Chevron has announced the possibility of oil being in the Gulf of Mexico. But the area they're going to go drill in, they're going to drill in 10,000 feet of water, 5,000 feet of silt. There'll be 15,000 feet below the surface before they hit the structure where they're going to try to drill. If you think about it, it would be easier to walk on the face of the moon than it would be to go to that sector of this blue planet and look for oil.
The big question, Josh, is what are we going to do in 25 years' time when the oil is seriously depleted?
Of course, this isn't the first time we've had an oil shortage. Back in 1973, OPEC cut the flow of oil off to punish the U.S. for supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. When Jimmy Carter became president, he responded by launching an ambitious program to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. He even had solar panels installed on the roof of the White House.
We must start now to develop the new, unconventional sources of energy that we will rely on in the next century.
Carter's plan was working, and by the time he left office, he had reduced America's energy use by 25%.
It's a problem that we will not be able to solve in the next few years, and it's likely to get progressively worse through the rest of this century.
After Carter left office, the Reagan administration took the solar panels down.
They even cut the fuel economy standards. We had a nice rising trend of fuel economy standards, and they were notched back under Reagan, just to encourage big cars.
The perception of that administration was there are no real energy problems that the market cannot solve. We don't need any more policies, and in fact, we haven't had any real energy policies since the Carter administration.
Since the Reagan administration, we've had this attitude of it's good to consume as much as you can because that makes everybody richer, and of course it's a huge lie.
Every president going back to Richard Nixon has watched the increasing reliance on foreign oil steadily.
Before Jimmy Carter became president, he was a peanut farmer. What business was our recent president and vice president engaged in before they took office? It wasn't peanut farming.
Of course, President Bush is a Texas oil man. It was Texas Oil that put him into office, and there's no way he can ever pass legislation that will seriously harm the petroleum industry.
According to the Center for Public Integrity, the oil industry spent more than $420 million between 1998 and 2004 funding politicians and political parties. ExxonMobil came in first, giving $60 million. Chevron Texaco gave $40 million, and BP gave $30 million. This really begs the question, is our government for sale? Several months before 9/11, Vice President Dick Cheney held 40 secret meetings with the heads of major oil companies.
In those meetings, it was obvious that the oil companies were writing energy policy for our country.
Documents pertaining to Cheney's meetings, released through the Freedom of Information Act, were purposefully blanked out. However, the Justice Department released maps from the meetings that showed the oil companies discussed Iraqi oil pipelines, oil refineries, and oil fields. Iraq had the second largest oil reserves in the world. The maps were dated March 2001, 6 months before 9/11.
When we tried to swear them to an oath, the Republican majority refused to have them take the oath. It was outrageous.
We look forward to questions. Senator Cantwell?
Mr. Chairman, I would like the committee to vote on whether we swear
There will
in.
be no vote. That's not in order at all. It's the decision of the chairman, and I have made that decision.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we swear in the witnesses.
And I rule that out of order.
I second the motion.
Thank you very much. That's the last we're going to hear about that because it's out of order.
Mr. Chairman, if a senator makes this request and there's a second, why wouldn't we have a vote on that?
Because you can't vote to put in the rules something's not there.
Here they were preparing the country for a disaster that we now see upon us, and they denied that they were there.
Did your company or any representatives in your companies participate in Vice President Cheney's Energy Task Force in 2001? The meeting?
No.
Sir?
No. We did not, no.
The guy that made sure the oil executives were not under oath is Senator Ted Stevens from the great oil state of Alaska. He was later indicted for accepting undisclosed gifts from oil companies. Viking Grill, $5,000. 1999 Land Rover, $50,000. Extensive home renovations, $250,000. Owning your own senator from Alaska? Priceless.
The Washington Post published a list of the attendees. It was a conspiracy, and the American public is paying a price for that now.
If we think about the way we felt after September 11th and why that event had the power that it had, there wasn't a story to explain that event. When we lose our story, when we lose our sense of where we are in time and space, we become childlike, regressed. That's what happens in a state of shock. And you are very inclined to believe in strong father-like figures who claim that they have the story, that they have it all figured out. And so if we think about, what happened after September 11th when we lost our story, the eagerness of the Bush administration was so acute in planting a new story immediately, and this new story was called the War on Terror.
Suddenly on September 12th, we have a war meeting in the White House where you have Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, saying, we got to take out Iraq. Paul Wolfowitz said in an interview with Vanity Fair magazine, we just had to pick an issue to sell this case to the American public, and the issue we picked was WMD.
The natural impulse after September 11th was for people to try to turn to each other to reorient themselves. And that's how you get out of shock, is you fill in the blanks.
The nexus of WMD and terrorism has now been created. It doesn't exist. There is no connection between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. There are no weapons of mass destruction.
And if we think about the way the Bush administration responded to that very healthy quest for context, they waged war on that process.
The more we found out what the truth was, the more the truth became inconvenient for the policy objectives of the United States government.
There was pre-9/11, where we knew certain things, and post-9/11, where there was a whole new language, a whole new narrative. We were starting over from scratch. And there's nothing more dangerous than that. People without a past can be made to do anything.
And the people who knocked these buildings down.
The American economy lives and dies on oil. The global economy lives and dies on oil. So it would be naive to say that it's not about oil. It's about oil in a big way.
When I stop and think what we are doing, who's getting killed, Who's making a killing? People scratching for food, living in ruin. It just makes no sense. Who's kidding who with the gods of lighting fire? Who's kidding who with your guns and souls for hire? Who's kidding who's found truth through lips of lies? Who's kidding me? Who's kidding you? Who's kidding
Our desire and our need to protect the flow of foreign oil requires us to spend a lot of money in a military presence in the Middle East. We spend $50 billion a year. Just everyday military expenditures to protect the flow of oil, we spend $50 billion.
Congress appropriates money to federal agencies and departments to spend, and they can't account for the transactions that are undertaken with the money. The federal government, as of the year 2001, had over $3 trillion in what the General Accounting Office calls undocumentable transactions. The biggest problem was at the Pentagon.
Its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
I would argue that the most serious threat to the United States is not someone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan or Pakistan, but our own fiscal irresponsibility.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
The attacks happened on the 11th of September, and ever since then, that information has been classified. Americans should be asking, what's happened to the money? Where has the money gone?
Spiraling oil prices are hitting European businesses hard.
Today, oil set another record high.
Executives from the country's top oil companies found themselves in the spotlight on Capitol Hill today.
Does it trouble any of you when you see what you're doing to us?
Last year, what was your compensation?
In total, about $12.5 million.
I know it's a matter of public record. I don't know the exact amount.
Well, Mr. Lowe, I wish I made enough money that I didn't even have to know how much I make.
It's really a crisis of centralized power and a nexus between a single industry with near monopoly control over something that we all need with the power of the state.
The oil companies are making the largest profits ever. ExxonMobil made over $40 billion in a single year. You know, that's larger than the GDP of some small countries.
The corporate and the state are merging.
What we are seeing is a government run for the oil companies. It's very, very clear.
International trade in oil is all denominated in dollars. When those countries sell oil, the dollars that result from that sale flow into the American banking system. What this means for the United States is that the U.S. is able to purchase oil simply by printing dollars. That's a very good deal if you can keep it going. It's analogous to a cash flow problem which you deal with using the NBNA credit card that you get in the mail. You run up the credit line on that until you can't spend any more, and then you use the Citibank card that comes in the next day's mail and you run up the credit line on that. The United States has been doing this now since 1980, and it's built up something that economists call the net foreign debt. That net foreign debt now equals more than $3.5 trillion. If you keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, you've got a choice. You can either go to court and declare bankruptcy, or you can pick up a gun and go rob a service station. The United States has elected to pick up a gun and go rob a service station. That's what the war on terror is all about.
Until we start questioning this basic idea of the right to live beyond one's means, to extract and extract and extract, then the problems will repeat themselves.
You know, X equals Y plus Z. X is that which makes America happy. X feeds America's needs and desires. Y is what America owns, has the ability. So as long as X equals Y, we're in balance, we're in harmony, everything's cool. But Y is a very small number compared to X. The American appetite is huge. So we now need Z, which is what the rest of the world has. And we're making Z a bigger and bigger and bigger number, which means we have to go out and get Z in a manner which is beneficial to America.
The problem is not dependence on foreign oil. The problem is the imperial mindset.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. This evening, I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
When I was a little boy, I went to Europe with my father, to Czechoslovakia, to Poland, to Greece and Italy and Germany and France. And everywhere we went, we were met by vast crowds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, who came out on the street because they wanted to be near an American politician, because they loved our country. And this wasn't just because my father had a brother who was martyred 4 years before. Hundreds of thousands of people, they were starved for American leadership. They were hungry for our moral authority. They proudly named their streets after our presidents, Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Roosevelt and Kennedy. And I remember the day after 9/11, when the headline on the biggest newspaper in France, Le Monde, was, "We're all Americans now." And for 3 weeks after 9/11, tens of thousands of Muslim people in Tehran came out onto the streets to have spontaneous candlelight vigils, to express their solidarity, their sympathy, their love for the United States of America. We were the most beloved nation on the face of the planet. And it took 230 years of disciplined, restrained, visionary leadership by Republican and Democratic presidents to build up those vast reservoirs of public adoration for the United States and for our values. Through monumental arrogance and incompetence, these oil slaves in the White House have drained those reservoirs dry. And, you know, to me, that is the bitterest pill to swallow, because I saw in the faces of those crowds when I was a little boy the hope for leadership from the United States, not just to do good things for our country, but to do great things for all of humanity. Abraham Lincoln said that America is a great nation because we are a good nation. And he said if we ever stop being a good nation, we'll quickly lose our greatness as well. Because of our addiction to oil, we have lost that greatness because we lost our goodness. You know, we put the oil in front of the Bill of Rights. This isn't a great nation just because it's a place where you can come and make a big pile for yourself and whoever dies with the most stuff wins. It's good because of the values that we're proud of that we pass down to our children.
This is a crucial time for our country and our world. The changes we need to make are monumental. The challenges we face are almost insurmountable. Robert Kennedy's father often said, "Some men see things as they are and say, 'Why?' I dream of things that never were and say, 'Why not?'" America isn't the only country that suffers from its addiction to oil. I wanted to see how other nations are dealing with this problem. The citizens of Germany demanded renewable energy, and their government responded by investing billions of dollars into solar, wind, and biodiesel technologies. I wasn't surprised to learn that one of their greatest thinkers had also been a big proponent of green energy.
In the MM Museum, we present the world's first diesel engine, and also a very important part is the diary of Rudolf Diesel.
So this is his actual original diary?
Yes. Some notes.
Rudolf Christian Karl Diesel is born in Paris in 1858 to German parents. He's a shy boy who spends much of his time drawing. He shows an interest in all things mechanical and often takes apart the family cuckoo clock. On his 14th birthday, Rudolf announces his purpose in life. He is to become an engineer, the best engineer in the world. He excels in school, winning scholarship after scholarship, in some schools earning the highest scores ever recorded. He learns to speak 3 languages, German, French, and English. In 1880, Rudolf starts an apprenticeship building refrigeration and steam engines. He's appalled at the inefficiency of the steam engine. In 1892, he patents a design for a revolutionary, highly efficient new engine. German patent number 6721, the machine we know as the diesel engine. He becomes a millionaire many times over by the age of 40. He debuts his engine at the Paris exhibition of 1900. The engine runs on peanut oil. More than 50 million people attend. The escalator is introduced and the first publicly exhibited films with sound are shown. But Rudolf's engine wins the Grand Prix, the highest prize. It was his hope that by fueling an engine with an agricultural product, he could take the power away from big industry and put it back into the hands of the everyday farmer and the common man. In 1913, Rudolf says goodbye to his wife and children to go to the opening of a diesel engine factory in England. He boards the SS Dresden at Antwerp to cross the English Channel. After dining with the ship's captain, he retires to his cabin, about 10 o'clock that night. The captain later says he appeared to be in good spirits. The next morning, Rudolf Diesel is missing. The ship is searched to no avail. The final entry of his journal is a simple drawing of a cross. A few days later, his lifeless body was found floating by fishermen. The engine that he created over 100 years ago still runs today. After Diesel's death, Standard Oil introduced a dirty byproduct of the gasoline distillation process that could run a diesel engine. They call it diesel fuel. Germany has over 1,900 public filling stations for biodiesel. Why?
It's good for our Mother Earth.
A lot of people want to save the planet, but even more want to save something else.
It's cheaper. The price is cheaper.
Without any help from the government, biodiesel production would not be competitive. So government offers a tax break for biodiesel. The effect is that it's sold at gas stations up to 15% cheaper than ordinary diesel.
Biodiesel has become such a hot topic in Germany that even their pop culture heroes are biodiesel friendly.
My artist name is Smudo. It's also a nickname. My real name is Michael Schmidt.
Smudo is one of Germany's most popular rap stars. Over here, the guy's bigger than Hasselhoff.
It's really easy to say why biodiesel is better fuel for the environment, because it's biodegradable, it has less additives, it has less emissions than usual diesel, and on top of that, it's cool. With fuel, you can just go and grow it in your own garden, take it and put it in a race car. Mein Rapsfeld, Digga. Oh.
Sweden has set a national mandate that it will be petroleum-free by 2020. That is something the people of Sweden decided they wanted to do, and the government followed.
The government has, for many years, really been promoting renewable energy.
Sweden has decided to take away all taxes on renewable fuels.
So that means that the price of this fuel is attractive to the customers.
The Prime Minister, he announced that Sweden was to become a green people's home.
I sat with the director of combustion research in Volvo Powertrain in Gothenburg, Sweden, and he got out his charts and he started showing me, this is our plan for 2010 and this is our plan for 2020. They have a very, very long-term view, and they're trying to prepare themselves for what's happening with fuels out in the future. They're very worried about the shortage of petroleum and the fact that fuel prices are going to go up dramatically, and they want to be prepared.
We have a long history, more than 10 years in Sweden, with ethanol and biofuel. Altogether, we have sold roughly 21,000 units in Sweden. A very important part in this is also the government and the Swedish state.
If you believe in the environmental development, you know that companies that are environmental sound, they will make big money in the coming years.
At the moment, we have 700 taxis here in Stockholm. Before the end of 2010, at minimum, 80% of those cars should be what we call green cars.
Frederick, what makes you want to do green taxis?
Well, the answer is very simple. I have 3 children.
My trip overseas was cut short when I received some bad news from back home. You could say it was like another death in my family.
Packing more than 140-mile-an-hour winds, Katrina ripped for the Gulf Coast.
I called my family and they said, we're walking out of the house and we don't know if we'll be back. And then the lines went dead.
9 million gallons of toxic oil spread into the bayous and the rivers and the swamps. All of it crude oil, all of it from the oil industry. None of it was reported by the media. That's a spill as big as the Exxon Valdez.
Now, here's the tragedy. They never paid that bill. They've never acknowledged their responsibility, nor has any state official ever mentioned it, nor has the federal delegation ever mentioned it.
The petrochemical industry is king in Louisiana, and it can do no wrong. They've convinced all of government that the Louisiana government simply cannot exist without the petrochemical industry.
And so we're now in the position of asking the American taxpayer to restore coastal Louisiana while the wealthiest corporations in the world, they're getting off scot-free. They're not paying a dime. The fact that Katrina was intolerable was largely oil industry made.
We know the Gulf of Mexico has gotten much warmer in the last 50 years. And when you have warmer water, you get more intense storms.
Hurricane Katrina, when it was passing Florida, was a Stage 1 category hurricane. And when it hit the abnormally warm oceans of the Gulf of Mexico, it turned into a Stage 5 hurricane.
As the Earth heats up, more water evaporates, and the atmosphere becomes moister. And this moisture in the atmosphere fuels hurricanes. And so hurricanes are expected to get more intense with global warming.
Of all the states in the United States, Louisiana stands to lose the most from global warming. It's like we're right in the middle of the target.
The causes of global warming are the human use of energy. 80% of that energy comes from carbon dioxide producing fuels, oil and coal and natural gas. It's the hot car effect. The glass, like these gases, lets sunlight in, but it won't let the radiant heat back out. And so it gets warmer. If we burn all the coal and all the oil and gasoline and everything we possibly can, the ultimate sea level rise could be about 20, 21 feet. And 21 feet is just beyond what anybody can imagine. 10 feet is beyond what anybody can imagine.
The problems are as serious as a heart attack. This is not a problem that's 200 years away. This is a problem that's now, that the children that are coming into the world now are going to face a radically different climate. In the next president's administration, this firm limit on CO2 emissions has to be in place that systematically reduces carbon. That's what the American people want. That's what the economy requires. That's what the climate requires. And that's what our national security requires.
I joined a relief mission to bring supplies to New Orleans. We left in a biodiesel-powered boat, carrying food, water, and medicine. I had a lot of time to think on that crossing.
I really wanted to give up. I mean, boy, What is the point? What's the point of doing all this work to promote clean energy, to promote a sustainable planet, if we're gonna destroy everything? When we came back to Louisiana after the hurricanes had passed, people would just stop in the street and they would just hug each other, just because they were alive. I mean, I saw shell workers helping people who lived in the nearby communities. I saw poor people pulling rich people out of the rubble. It was such a humanizing experience. It doesn't matter who you work for. It doesn't matter what you've done up to this point. It is gonna take everyone. It is gonna take every corporate entity. It is gonna take every government power to create the world that we're gonna have to create to survive. And that was a personal shift for me. I stopped fighting from anger, and I started looking for partners.
I know that change occurs not just from some big monumental thing, but from an individual saying, you know what, I'm gonna make a change.
People feel that they're not important. They've been made to feel that they don't count, when in fact they're the only thing that counts. The genius of America is not in big corporate power, it's not in big government, it's in people who understand this notion of the common good.
You did it. You drove around the country in your biodiesel van, and you made a difference in so many people's lives, and then you made a difference in my life. And then I've turned so many people on, and it's the power of the individual to affect their perimeter of friends. And then each of those people have a perimeter of friends, and that's the way this whole revolution takes place.
Jonathan Richman told me about biodiesel, and then I got this book, and he gave me this book, and I read the book about 5 times.
I have a brand new Mercedes that I just bought 3-4 months ago. It's never had any kind of fuel in it except biodiesel.
Willie was so excited about biodiesel, he told his friend Carl about it. Carl owns Carl's Corner, the mother of all Texas truck stops. Now he sells a special blend called Bio Willie. Carl even built a stage so Willie could come and spread the biodiesel message. And who's starting to hear that message? The people who use diesel the most, the truckers.
Actually, this is the first time I've been here. I came down because I listen to XM radio. I listen a lot to Bill Mack.
I first heard about biodiesel about 4 years ago. Willie Nelson was on my radio show by telephone, and he said, I'm using that stuff. I said, it works? He said, it works great. I've got it in my buses. And the truckers heard this, and it started to roll.
Well, it's getting better fuel mileage. The truck is running better. It's cleaner for the environment. I don't smoke anymore. Well, the truck don't smoke.
Just call me Elmer. Everybody else does.
What do you think about the U.S.'s dependence on foreign oil?
It's a shame. It's a flat-ass shame. You can censor that if you want to.
And eventually, when we have the supply to meet the demand, be cheaper. And we will not be having to lean on some country over the water to give us our fuel.
We don't have to rely upon congressmen and senators or presidents or whoever it is that want to get us involved with foreign oil.
99.9% of the things that you touch in everyday life is one way or another shipped to you by truck. Everything you're wearing right now at one time or another was on a truck.
So how does all your stuff get to you? The shoes on your feet, the shirt on your back, the chair you're sitting in right now. Ever think about it? Check it out. A lot of your stuff actually starts out overseas. Your stuff gets loaded onto a boat powered by a diesel engine. The boat brings it across the ocean. Your stuff gets unloaded at a port and put onto a train powered buy a diesel engine. The train brings your stuff to a distribution center, where your stuff gets unloaded onto a truck, powered by a, you got it, diesel engine. Diesel engines do more than just transport things. They move earth. They run power plants. They build buildings. The diesel engine is by far the dominant engine of the world, and every one of them can run on biodiesel today without any modifications. I headed back to California to buy a new diesel car. Buying a diesel car is actually quite easy.
I just went on to Craigslist.
I found my car on eBay.
Type in the keyword diesel and you get hundreds of results.
I found it in a car magazine.
I chose a used VW Golf from a local car dealer.
This is my first pour of biodiesel, and I'm grateful to Mr. DeKal for introducing me to this. That's it, there it goes.
People are interested in this.
This is my personal BioBling fleet.
How do we get the fuel to more people? How do we make it more accessible?
My 1984 Lincoln Continental Bill Blass edition.
So I co-founded the LA Biodiesel Co-op. It's a mobile filling station.
My 1996 monster truck, it is a Chevy Tahoe that came factory equipped with a diesel engine, and it runs 100% biodiesel. This over here is my gas guzzler, the Toyota Prius. It is the only vehicle that I own that runs on gasoline.
That then was a catalyst for getting it into actual bricks and mortar stations, and we managed to get it into a couple stations here in Los Angeles, which is where I fill up now, as do hundreds of other people who are driving on biodiesel.
Manufacture-wise, it is a diesel car, and I didn't do anything special to it. It was ready to go right off the assembly line to run off biodiesel.
Some of the sources of information out there make you think that there's these complicated conversions that have to happen, and I realized that, no, I could just go find a good quality diesel engine and burn this alternative fuel.
The car runs identical. There's no difference in the way the Volkswagen handles for power.
You know, it's like walking past a restaurant.
It smells food-like rather than not food-like.
What does this one smell like?
Smells actually good. That one.
That one smells worse.
Yeah. Okay, that's biodiesel because I can tell because it smells like vegetable oil.
We got calls from parents and teachers about the smell of diesel that they noticed when they went on field trips with their kids. So we took monitoring equipment inside school buses and found that the levels were about 4 times higher inside the bus compared to outside the bus.
Our school buses are diesel powered. Petroleum diesel exhaust is a toxic carcinogen. We know that diesel exhaust is linked to cancer, premature death, and health problems like asthma. Since we can do something about this, it is unimaginable to me that we wouldn't.
You know, when you're behind a school bus, you know, you're just
taking it in.
You are. Well, you're putting your shirt over your, and our kids are inside those buses, and it's so easy. All these buses can be changed over to biodiesel.
I discovered one city that's not gambling with our kids' health.
Las Vegas, or the Clark County School District, has over 1,500 buses that have been operating on biodiesel for almost 7 years. They are the largest bus fleet in the world on biodiesel.
What do you think if parents knew that putting your kids on a school bus that doesn't have biodiesel is like putting them in the school bus full of cigarette smoke?
I think parents don't actually know what's in the fuel.
I can tell you that use of biodiesel fuel in those school buses is going to protect those children.
We have to care about our kids now, this different generation of kids that we have now. We got to show them, we got to set the tone for them so they'll be able to do the same thing.
We ought to be demanding that the school boards throughout this country insist that their fleets use that fuel because it works.
Biodiesel was finally catching on.
One of our motivations for using biodiesel, as you see, this is a recycling center. We wanted to be sustainable. I thought it was a non sequitur to send trucks through the streets of Berkeley with the word ecology written on them and use petrodiesel.
This is truly a groundbreaking event to have the Navy embrace biodiesel.
The Navy was using biodiesel, McDonald's was using biodiesel, FedEx was using biodiesel, UPS was using biodiesel, Disney World was using biodiesel.
It's really, really cool.
It was a feeling like, wow, the good guys can win. You know, we're gonna succeed. And then, overnight, the whole thing changed. Science magazine published 2 articles about the potential dangers of biofuels. Instantaneously, 600 newspapers had these articles front page. Biofuels are causing deforestation. Biofuels are causing global warming. Biofuels, crime against humanity. Biofuels starve kids. Most of the gas stations in Germany closed. Carl's Corner got crushed. And even my neighborhood gas station closed its biodiesel pump. Was my entire life's purpose, everything that I'd worked so hard for, hurting the environment? I worked for 10 years doing nothing but promoting biodiesel. And now my work is a crime against humanity. 10 years of helping people, seeing an industry get built, gone overnight. I mean, were biofuels worse than oil?
Vegetation gives you fuel.
Some people think that biofuels really suck. Biofuels worse than gasoline? Do they really know how bad gasoline is? When we go to the gas station to buy gasoline, we actually only pay half of the true cost of the gasoline. That's because the other half is given to the oil companies by our government in the form of hidden subsidies. But we pay for those too, with our taxes. Maybe that's why the US doesn't have any money for things like a national health care plan.
Vegetation gives you fuel.
The whole process of making gasoline is incredibly inefficient.
For every 1 unit of energy that I put into making gasoline, I only get about 80% out.
It actually takes more energy to make a gallon of gasoline than a gallon of gasoline contains.
So what about biofuels? The 2 most common biofuels today are ethanol, made from corn, and biodiesel from soybeans. Ethanol is used for gasoline engines, and biodiesel is for diesel engines.
Our first generation biofuel was based on logic. These are agriculture products that we can subsidize. You can make corn-based ethanol, and there's a big lobby behind it. And similarly, soy. You can make a good biodiesel from soy, and there's a big lobby behind it.
Most of the ethanol in the US is made from corn, and corn is grown in huge monocrop fields of tens or even hundreds of thousands of acres. To grow that corn takes a tremendous amount of fertilizers and pesticides, which all come from, you guessed it, oil. When you factor in the phosphates, the nitrates, the fertilizers, the chemicals, the fuel used for the trucks, and the fuel used for the tractor, it takes as much energy to make a gallon of ethanol as a gallon of ethanol contains. So ethanol is arguably energy neutral. It's a little better than gasoline, but not when you consider the pollution.
Since the 1980s, in the Gulf of Mexico, there has developed a dead zone, and that dead zone is resulting from nitrogen flowing down the river from all of our corn production. This year, scientists are estimating it'll be the largest ever, about 8,500 square miles. That's the size of Massachusetts.
Ethanol from corn is grown by large corporations that often control the inputs for the crop, and they control the sale of the finished product. Because our agricultural corporations are subsidized to such a large degree, they're actually able to grow food at lower than world market prices. What this means is we overproduce food in the US by about 30%. That 30% extra food actually gets dumped onto the world market at prices lower than their farmers can grow the same food. So what happens in this system is farmers in other countries stop farming. They give up and quit, and they become locked into a cycle of dependence on cheap food from the US, which relies on cheap oil. Now, let's assume that our oil price doubles. In the US, that may mean that corn or a box of cornflakes goes up by 25%. But in countries overseas, that means that people starve.
75% of the increase in the price of food has been because of increases in the price of oil. Transportation prices, packaging prices, everything's gone up because they're all dependent on energy and oil.
So then there's biodiesel made from soybeans. For every 1 unit of fossil energy that's put into the biodiesel process, you actually get 3 units out in biodiesel energy. So biodiesel arguably is energy positive. Soybeans have a lot of the same problems as corn. They're grown in huge monocrop farms using a tremendous amount of petroleum fertilizers, pesticides, and other inputs.
And in some parts of the world, to grow those soybeans, some governments are allowing something unacceptable to happen.
The last few years, you've seen an expansion of soy production in places like Brazil, and it's led to deforestation. But there's something wrong with the way our current economic system values tropical rainforest, when it's worth more to cut down that forest than it is to have a standing forest that's providing us with carbon sequestration, drinking water, biodiversity, medicinal plants, and habitat for millions of species.
I've suggested that we ban the export of biofuels from any country that doesn't meet reforestation targets.
What about making biofuels sustainably? I mean, after all
those engines are going to need some other kind of fuel.
Big, heavy, earth-moving equipment are really not going to be electric powered. They need too much power. So the diesel engine, we believe, is here to stay, and biodiesel is a perfect solution. As far as the sustainability of biodiesel, we're just in round 1 here. We don't need to use virgin oils from food crops. This year we'll run 15 different feedstocks. We could produce biodiesel with waste fats, waste fish oil. We're also developing virgin oils out of crops like pennycress or camelina that are weeds, essentially. They grow very cheaply in suboptimum soils.
This is a very proud city, and it used to be a significant manufacturing hub. And over time, one after another, these companies have either shut their doors or they've moved overseas.
If you think about Erie, there's been so much innovation here, whether it's the locomotive business or the appliance business. So there is a history here of innovation, and you just got to pull it out.
My vision is that Hero BX leads the second American Revolution.
Hero BX has really been bigger than just the employment, and we have generated great employment here.
The issue is that you need a triple bottom line because you need the ecology considered. The second thing is you have to have the heart in it. That's what allows people to do their best. They're a critical component to any success that we're able to attain. That's what the difference is.
We are clearly the biggest biodiesel producer in America and North America. We're 10% up the technology curve. We know we need a Generation 2 feedstock, but we know there's a Generation 3 out there. And our goal is to be on the leading edge of that. We're a fuel technology company. But we do tend to be focused on biodiesel because that is such a terrific solution to what's out there. Biodiesel also is going to evolve and is evolving into a terrific aviation fuel.
Richard Branson. He owns an airline, a record company. He even owns a spaceship. But what he wants, more than anything, is a sustainable fuel.
We're very pleased today to be making a commitment to invest 100% of all future proceeds into tackling global warming for an estimated value of $3 billion over the next 10 years.
I've always believed that one person can make a difference. And when that one person is a bazillionaire, he can make a really big difference.
In biofuels, there will be bad biofuels which may eat into the food supply, and there will be good biofuels that will not eat into the food supply. And I think what the environmental organizations have to be very careful of is not to bracket all biofuels are bad for you. It just doesn't make sense.
Today's Virgin Atlantic flight is a major milestone in the development of cleaner fuels. We wanted to prove that a plane could fly at 30,000 feet on biofuel. That has happened, and we believe that we can now start developing biofuel for the future that hopefully the whole of Virgin Atlantic can use, and other airlines too.
What we have to aim for is a technological breakthrough. And that technological breakthrough hopefully will enable us to drive our cars, our lorries, our buses, our planes on clean fuels, which are not damaging the environment, on fuels that are not eating into the food supply. You know, that is the utopia we must strive for.
Did that technological breakthrough already happen? Remember this guy, the peanut farmer? The day President Carter installed solar panels on the White House, he announced a new research program.
But if we use our technological imagination, if we can work together to harness the light of the sun, the power of the wind, and the strength of rushing streams, then we will succeed.
The Carter administration established a Solar Energy Research Institute. Part of the research was looking for a way to convert the energy of the sun into a renewable fuel source that could be grown on land not suitable for farming, something that could be irrigated with wastewater and would produce exponentially huge yields, something that could pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Working in laboratories across the country, they found what they were looking for.
One real sleeper that's very interesting that may have a lot of potential is algae-based biodiesel.
Our Virgin Green Energy team of people are trying their best to see if they can invest in and develop an algae-based aviation fuel.
Algae, and I'll show you. You want to see it? Here, this could be it. This could be the stuff that saves society.
Carter's Aquatic Species Program determined that in a space of less than 15% of the Sonoran Desert, America can grow enough fuel for the whole country. The total cost of the 20-year program was $25 million. According to the Congressional Research Service, the cost of the Iraq War is $300 million a day.
It's entirely possible that your next car could run off of biodiesel produced by microalgae.
Algae are the original oil producers on Earth, and so this oil is very similar to the oil that comes straight out of the ground.
Algae can double its cell mass every few hours. It goes from 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 cells to 8. It grows so quickly that we can go from the cells on this plate to a flask to a large-scale industrial fermenter of hundreds of thousands of liters in a span of days. We take a 150 million year process, which is what it takes to make oil that we use in our cars right now, and we condense it to 3 days, and we end up with oil that, when burned, doesn't add additional carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
You can make all of the things from a regular barrel of oil from this oil. You can make household cleaning supplies, diesel fuel, industrial chemicals, plastics, jet fuel.
Can I taste it? Sure. Wow, tastes like peanut oil.
We actually developed this solar diesel so that it would run in pre-existing infrastructure, and that means from refinery to pipeline to gas station to car.
Vegetation gives you fuel.
The new generation of biofuels has to be made from our waste streams.
Power plants produce between 30 to 40% of the CO2 footprint of this country. It's a total shift in how you look at power plants. Power plants are sources of algae food, which is CO2.
This offered an alternative to carbon management, capturing CO2 from our existing operations. We can feed the existing emissions into these farms.
We asked ourselves, how many power plants in this country, how many of them could support the technology? The answer is more than 1,700 could support algae farms.
We don't have to change anything. We don't have to modify the plant. We just add the farm adjacent to the plant.
In a sustainable world, waste has to equal fuel. We always make waste. We're good at it.
Do you know how much money cities spend trying to get rid of that? To get rid of it, you know, like, ooh, it's poo, ooh. Power to the poopers, that's what I say. In fact, I say power from the poopers.
Every community that has a wastewater treatment plant could actually be growing algae. I'm third generation oil and gas. My grandfather and his 7 brothers got into the industry about 1910 in Louisiana. This is a 6 1/4 drill bit that we used. Yeah, I think it went about 4,600 feet. From our oil field experience, we've developed a system to harvest and then extract the algal oil. Smell it there, it's like a vegetable oil.
That's algal oil.
Yeah, smells good. Smells like money, right?
It smells like money.
Our program is to take the wastewater, discharge it into our ponds, grow the algae, which will extract the oil from it to produce a biofuel.
Presently, we've built an infrastructure that we could produce 300 to 600 million gallons of fuel a year from. I got a phone call from a journalist, and his question was, why in the world would an oil and gas company want to compete with itself with alternative fuels? Without hesitating, my response was, this is what I want to leave as a legacy to my children and grandchildren.
Biofuels are a critical part of the solution. You know, the problem maybe is thinking about biofuels as the entire solution. America's addicted to oil. The president told us so. Where are we going to get a barrel of oil?
The new sustainable barrel, here's how we might fill it. Sustainable biofuels like algae are great. Another part of the barrel could come from biomass. Biomass is any organic material. Trees, garbage, yard clippings, agricultural, industrial waste, wood chips, sawdust, paper products, lumber scraps.
And my personal favorite, used cooking oil.
This is the start of a forest. It is also the start of recovery from the dependency on foreign oil.
Another form of biomass are energy crops like wood.
Since the most dense form of biomass comes from wood, what if there was a faster way to grow trees?
Typical tree is going to grow to maturity in 10 to 15, 20, even 30 years. The megaflora tree that we're planting will grow to full maturity within 3 years. And when you cut it down, it'll regrow from its own stump to another full-size tree in 3 years again. We're growing a tree that captures carbon. We're growing a tree that can be used for biomass, and we can use that biomass to create biofuels. Well, the concept is to plant trees in a plantation like we're seeing here, but then to also intercrop, meaning to plant an oilseed crop in between the rows of trees. And by doing that, we'll have the trees to harvest as biomass and use to produce bioalcohols. We'll also have the oilseed that we can harvest to produce biodiesel. The trees were initially developed to remediate soils, meaning to take contaminants out of the soils. There's a lot of land that can't be planted right now across the country that is contaminated with selenium, boron, various different kinds of heavy metals. And a lot of that's considered what we'd call marginal land. the trees and the oilseed crop we're dealing with clean that soil up and allow it to be used for food crops again.
There are many, many tracts of land in California as well as across the country and in other countries where we can use the megaflora tree and produce significant volumes of biofuels to help our future.
According to the Department of Energy, America could get 20% of its electricity from wind power.
We now see a number of European countries that have literally replaced coal and are thinking about replacing nuclear with wind power.
To have wind power provide 100% of America's electricity would take several 100,000 turbines. Now, if you were to take all those towers and hypothetically put them all together into one space, that would be less than one single large coal strip mine in Wyoming.
We have enough harnessable wind energy in North Dakota, Montana, and Texas alone to power all the energy needs of our country.
I did a calculation a few years ago that if we had built wind turbines with the amount of money that we put into fighting the Iraqi war, that we would be getting more energy from wind power today than we ever got in oil from Iraq.
If you get 20% of our electric energy from wind, and it's going to create over 500,000 high-paying jobs for the economy, including many rural areas.
There are 80,000 parts in every wind turbine. This is big engineering. You can imagine like Boeing. Those are the jobs of the future. You can put Detroit back to work. Tell them, stop making SUVs, start making wind turbines. You can save the world and put your city back to work.
Enough solar energy falls on the surface of the planet in less than an hour to meet humankind's entire energy needs for a full year.
With only 7% of our existing urban area that's already developed, we can install solar photovoltaics to provide 100% of America's electricity requirements.
Having solar hasn't changed my life. I use the same amount of electricity. It makes me feel good, that's all. I feel good having solar power. It just sits there and makes electricity for me, and I can use as much as I want. And the stuff I don't use goes to other people.
So if you put a solar panel on the roof of your home, you ought to be able to sell that excess back to the grid and get market rates. And if you did that, all of a sudden, every American would be an energy entrepreneur, and every household would become a power plant. And think of what that does to our country. It makes every American richer.
The next part of the barrel should come from rethinking our vehicles.
The question to ask is, of the next billion cars we ship in the next 15 years on this planet, what technology can get into 500 million to 800 million of those cars to really make a difference?
Plug-in hybrid is a normal Prius that has an added battery pack and a plug. We can drive on electricity instead of gas. The sun can beat down on solar panels, and the solar panels can be connected to the grid, and the grid can charge the car.
With a plug-in hybrid, you could reduce our petroleum use by 80%. And that's even if the plug-in hybrid ran on conventional fuel. And of course, if you run it on biodiesel or ethanol, then you essentially knock out petroleum use.
Israel's going to be off of gasoline within 3 years. You get 120 miles on a charge. They're very fast cars. If you're going to go more than 120 miles, you can pull into any gas station. They'll slide out the exhausted battery and slide in a fresh one. There's 30 other nations that are now lined up to install these systems. This is going to happen faster than anybody imagined.
What's better for the environment than a green car? No car.
My vote would be a radically different public transportation system in every major city in America.
There's no reason over the next 20 years that we couldn't revitalize our urban environments to make them bicycle, pedestrian, and transit friendly.
Our air would become more breathable. We'd have lower level of toxicity. So you'd have a much more effective city. Whenever we put in a rail line, overnight the rail line ridership increased by 60,000 in one day. And that gives people choices.
But even with all these things, maybe the answer is to find a way to just need less energy.
Something like 20 or 30% of our energy use goes into the residential sector, and that's just extraordinarily wasteful.
It doesn't matter whether you're an individual that lives in a big home or an individual that lives in an apartment or a condo. There are lots of things you can do to take that first step, and I promise When you take that first step, you take another step, and you start off walking, but almost everybody starts running in the end because it's contagious, and you realize that you're doing great for the economy, great for yourself, your own pocketbook, but you're doing great for the Earth's resources and for the future generations that have to use them.
Conservation and efficiency is the cleanest, quickest, and cheapest way to ease our addiction to oil.
The question I get asked all the time, is it too late? What can I do? It's not solely about biodiesel. It's not solely all about the answers. It's about each person having a consciousness that the way we live affects the next person, and it affects our community, it affects our country, and ultimately affects the planet.
We can live a better life and not a more expensive life if all we do is care.
The message is about compassion. It doesn't matter if you're talking about being compassionate to a person or being compassionate to the planet.
I think what's stopping a lot of people, or companies also, from doing this, as well as governments, is they're waiting for the masses to do it and they'll join in. But what they forget about is the masses is made up of individuals. And until the individuals make the change, you don't have the masses.
The future for the country is a new alliance, where you have the best of business, the real new entrepreneurs with the new technologies, the best of labor that wants to be a part of rebuilding the economy, all standing together saying, listen, we are tired of the military petroleum complex running the country into the ground. We want a green future for this country. We want to create a green wave that can lift all boats. That's the future.
I was walking with my daughter on the beach. We happened to see plastics all over the place. And my daughter says, Dad, they're teaching me in school that plastics are destroying our planet. She goes, why don't you do something about it? And I said, you know what? Why not? 2.5 years later, we developed an additive, breaks down plastics to CO2, H2O, biomass that will be eaten by microorganisms. Do you realize there's actually 46,000 pieces of plastic floating in every square mile on the ocean? We are using 2 million bags per minute. Only 1% of that is ever recycled. The rest is floating around somewhere. It's in the landfills, and it doesn't break down. It just lasts and lasts and lasts. Guys, how you doing today? Isn't it sad that these plastic bags, they never break down? Wouldn't it make sense to use a plastic bag that will biodegrade?
My new bags are 52 by 64.
We can make any size you want.
And you can imagine how much petroleum base is in there.
This is the
Give
future.
me a card. I'm the beach supervisor, so I'll give you a call.
Hey, it's a pleasure talking. I got a little dirty hands,
That's
but
all right.
we don't mind. We're both in the garbage business, right, brother?
A green-collar job is basically a blue-collar job that's been upgraded to better respect the environment. All of the jobs that actually improve environmental health and pay well, those are green-collar jobs.
Filling the new sustainable barrel will be a challenge. So who's going to lead the way?
New York City puts up about 1% of the global warming gases in the country, and we've got to bring that number down. And if we do that, we can actually have a practical impact. And what I'm doing with my bill would be to mandate that all fuel oil in New York City, all fuel oil, and we have over 1 million homes using fuel oil in New York City, not to mention commercial uses, government uses, but all uses of fuel oil in New York City will contain 20% bio by 2013.
We go around the city and we collect the used cooking oil and turn it into clean-burning, renewable biodiesel fuel.
If you can make a community a better place, and you start with one place, it multiplies.
I just feel like a biodiesel man, you know. I need my cape, you know, and I can just fly around with the meshes on my back and just tell everyone, come on, let's save this earth. You know, let's get with this program.
Are cities behaving ecologically? The answer is no. Could they behave ecologically? Of course. It requires a desire to do so and an economic incentive. Because political will is one thing, social will is another thing, but the economics really drives the system, doesn't it? Okay, so is it economic to do this? And the answer is, are you kidding? Compared to what we have now, anything we can do to change this way of behaving is economic. New York City has lots of tidal power. They have the East River, for instance. We're experimenting now with turbines situated at the bottom of the East River, which will capture the electricity generated by the turbines turning in both directions. That's how we should be behaving. Are we gifted with sunlight in New York City? Well, we have about, 250 sunlight days a year, so we could use solar panels as a way of doing this. We could situate them at places like Floyd Bennett Air Force Base. This is an unused property in Brooklyn. It's inside the city limits. It's hundreds of acres. And every city has these characteristics, every one of them. I would like to see New York City and Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles and New Orleans and Phoenix and all those other great cities behave ecologically.
Here in the city, you could imagine what this would be like if every single rooftop had trees and grass on it. The city would be cooler, the air quality would be better, we could grow our own food.
What if we could grow that food locally within the city and at the same time sequester some of those emissions and the CO2 that's being generated by that concentrated population? What if we could do that in a way that was cost effective, provided jobs for local people? Well, that's pretty attractive.
Welcome to the third agricultural revolution. The vertical farm will make food, it will make water, and it will make energy. If we were to construct a 30-story vertical farm, 1 square New York City block in footprint, to grow enough food to feed 50,000 people.
Not only that, I get some of my biodiesel from the algae that we grow in that controlled environmental future farm.
And now suddenly we have the potential for having a sustainable world, the kind of world that has a future again.
Well, 9/11, I felt that impact, and if we don't be prepared now, we might just come right back around to it, and this is why we're here. We're here to prevent that situation from happening.
Mary, fill the glass to overflowing. Illuminate the path where we are going.
After 9/11, people really got the sense that there is a security component to energy independence, and that's something that should happen. And New Yorkers, being who they are, they want to have it happen here.
The world has been shaken. We wander, our homelands forsaken. In the dark night of the soul, bring some comfort to us all. Oh, Mother Mary, come and carry us in your embrace. Let
I think about my daughter growing up in the world, and I think about that's the world I'm handing my kid. And do we want that to be a world where we say, okay, here's a gas mask and a machine gun, have a nice life?
We're borrowing this earth from our children. We have to consider what we're leaving to our children.
President Kennedy, who went before the Congress in 1961 and said, we're going to put a man on the moon. And when he did that, it was a very bold thing to say. I mean, our rockets were blowing up on the launch pad. We haven't even invented Tang yet. But Kennedy understood the innate creative genius of the American people, and he understood that when Americans had a technological vision, you can unleash enormous creative energy.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energy and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
We can do things in this country if we have presidential leadership that has a vision for this nation, that is capable of mobilizing the scientific and technological and energy and entrepreneurial resources of the United States of America.
We are behind our competitors in fuel-efficient cars, in solar cell technology, at least its implementation. So we had some catching up to do, but we caught up and we passed the Soviets. We can do the same now in the field of energy.
People all over the world must make sure that they elect people who, top of their priority is, how do we address this problem?
Get involved in the political process.
You'd be amazed how much impact a politician feels just by being bombarded. Send postcards, send emails, make phone calls. If we really are going to let our government speak for us, then our government has to hear from us. Oil is going to become such a sacred commodity that we don't even know at this point what war looks like. We're the ones that run this government, even though it looks like special interests do. We have to start showing up. We have to vote for these political candidates and hold them accountable to what they're promising to do.
People can't rely on their pocketbook to change society. First you change your light bulb, then you change the law. You gotta be calling your congressman. You gotta be calling your legislator. The mayor's gotta know who you are. You gotta be talking to the people who are making the laws.
Vote for a person who will articulate and push a vision of clean energy for this country.
Going in right now as we speak. It's the most patriotic thing I've ever done.
We have the power to make a difference. Are we going to wait for the oil companies to hand it to us? Are we going to wait for the automakers to say, here, now, go? Forget about it. We now can make a difference today.
We all breathe the same air. If we have it in our power to do something to make that air cleaner, don't you think it's our fiduciary responsibility to do so? Families matter. You have the ability to do something to protect that family, and I believe you ought to do that without question, looking at alternative fuels.
In my lifetime, I've been able to see the blue planet in a way that my grandparents couldn't have imagined it. I've seen a photograph of it from thousands of miles in space, and it really is blue, isn't it? And it's gorgeous.
We are an accumulation of life forms. What you look at when you see another person is the history of this world, from the beginning of life to the present. As soon as we learn that lesson and that we sense our connectivity, then you can't help but want that connectivity to increase.
It's the most important thing in life is for people to at least have the choice. That's freedom. And I wanted to be able to offer that to my children.
The Earth is not a thing. It's not a rock. It's a living being. And we are part of that. If we begin to learn to live by the principles set forth in nature, we have infinite abundance of energy, infinite abundance of resources. we can sustain every living human being, as well as the human beings that will come. The choice is ours, every single one of ours. The rest of the journey is up to you.
Driving through the city and the smokestack lights, see the fires burning so deep into the night. Lost on the road, turn on the radio. I pass the static into empty space, and I wanna let go, don't want to blame. Turn off the noise, turn off the radio. Driving in the right direction, and you're not alone. You're driving in the right direction, and you're not alone. You drive home. And I'm realizing that I drove so far, looking for something that was here all along. Turn on my voice, I'm on the radio. Driving in the right direction, and you're not alone. You're driving in the right direction, and you're not alone. You drive. I'll be the one lighting up the way, gonna rise above to a brand new day. All there is to say, there's another way. I'll be the one lighting up the way, gonna rise above to a brand new day. All there is to say,